The morning of my sister's wedding was a whirlwind of excitement. I had barely slept the night before, anxious but elated for Olivia, my younger sister and best friend. She had been dreaming about this day since we were kids, and now it was finally here. I had been up since dawn, helping with last-minute details. The bridesmaids fluttered around in a sea of blush-colored dresses, stylists pinned curls and dabbed on lipstick, and Olivia, radiant in her wedding gown, floated through the room like a dream. "Emma, can you grab me a glass of orange juice?" Olivia asked, her voice soft but urgent. "Of course," I said, hurrying to the refreshment table set up in the bridal suite. I barely had time to take in the scene: flower arrangements in delicate pastels, the faint scent of peonies, and the sound of muffled laughter in the next room. The glass was cool in my hand as I turned to head back, but in my rush, I collided with someone. A sharp intake of breath. A sudden chill down my spine. And then, the horror. The orange juice splattered across a crisp white shirt, seeping into the fabric like a slow-moving disaster. My fiancé, Andrew, stood before me, his expression frozen in shock. "Emma," he said, his voice tight, measured. I could already see the frustration flicker in his storm-gray eyes. I opened my mouth, desperate to apologize, to explain, but the words tangled in my throat. And then, the moment that would change everything. Andrew exhaled sharply, glancing down at the stain as if it had personally offended him. And then, with a chilling calmness, he said, "You need to leave." I blinked, sure I had misheard him. "Wait, what?" My voice came out weaker than I intended. Andrew exhaled through his nose, his jaw tightening as he dabbed at the stain with his fingertips. The juice had seeped into the expensive fabric of his custom-tailored shirt, a dark patch spreading across his chest. His charcoal gray suit remained untouched, but that didn't seem to ease his frustration. "You need to leave, Emma," he repeated, slower this time, as if I were a child struggling to understand. I felt a ripple of confusion, quickly followed by embarrassment. Around us, heads were turning. The bridesmaids had paused in their flurry of preparations, a few of them exchanging uneasy glances. Olivia, standing in the middle of the room in her wedding dress, had frozen in place, her brows knitting together. "Andrew, it was an accident," I said, my voice just above a whisper. His lips pressed into a thin line. "An accident? Emma, this is my wedding suit. I have to stand in front of 100 people in less than an hour, and now I look like a mess." I reached out instinctively. "I can fix this. We can find another shirt." He took a step back. "No. Just, go." Something inside me cracked. My fiancé, the man I had spent 3 years with, the man who had promised to love me, was acting as if I had done something unforgivable. Over a spilled drink. I searched his face, hoping for some flicker of humor, some indication that this was just a dramatic overreaction. But there was nothing. Just coldness. And that was when I realized, this wasn't about the juice. Olivia stepped forward, placing a protective hand on my arm. "Andrew, don't be ridiculous. It's just a shirt. You have a spare, right?" Andrew barely acknowledged her. His eyes were on me, and there was something unsettling about the way he held my gaze. Like this moment had been coming for a long time. The room felt suffocating. Heat rushed to my face as I realized everyone was watching. Judging. Waiting for my response. My hands clenched at my sides. "Andrew," I said, my voice firmer now, "you're really kicking me out of my sister's wedding over this?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he let out a slow breath and turned to one of the groomsmen standing near the door. "Can someone walk her out?" A stunned silence fell over the room. And that was when I knew, this wasn't just about today. This was about something deeper. Something I hadn't seen coming. And maybe I should have. I felt the weight of every stare, the suffocating tension thick enough to choke on. The bridesmaids shifted awkwardly, their eyes darting between me and Andrew, no one daring to speak. Even Olivia, who was never one to stay silent, seemed too stunned to react. But the worst part? Andrew wasn't just angry. He was indifferent. I swallowed the lump in my throat. You're really doing this? My voice was quieter now, almost unrecognizable to my own ears. His jaw tensed, and for a brief second, something flickered across his face, something that almost looked like guilt. But then he turned away, adjusting the cuff of his jacket like I was nothing more than an inconvenience. One of his groomsmen, David, hesitated before stepping forward, clearing his throat uncomfortably. "Emma, maybe you should." I didn't let him finish. "No need," I said sharply, my voice steadier than I felt. "I can walk myself out." Without another word, I turned on my heel and strode toward the door. My heart pounded with each step, my vision slightly blurred from the heat burning behind my eyes. "Don't cry. Not here." But as I reached the exit, Olivia's voice cut through the silence. "Emma, wait." I paused, turning just enough to see her. She was standing in the middle of the room, torn between me and the wedding she had spent months planning. Her blue eyes, so much like mine, were pleading. "Don't go." Andrew let out an exasperated sigh. "Liv, come on. We don't have time for this." My sister shot him a glare that could have set the entire venue on fire. "Are you seriously acting like this is normal?" she snapped. "Like it's okay to kick your own fiancé out of a wedding over a stain?" For the first time Andrew hesitated. I waited, hoping, foolishly, that he would realize how absurd this was. That he would apologize, laugh it off, or at least give me something. But all he did was press his lips together, glance at his watch, and mutter, "We don't have time for drama." Something inside me shattered. I stared at him, at the man I was supposed to marry, and felt a strange sense of clarity. This wasn't just about the orange juice. This was about control. About power. About how little I actually meant to him when things didn't go his way. And I suddenly understood something. I wasn't losing him today. I was realizing I never really had him. I turned back to Olivia, forcing a small, shaky smile. "It's okay," I said softly. "Enjoy your wedding." Then I walked out, leaving behind my sister's wedding, my fiancé, and, though I didn't fully realize it yet, the life I had thought was mine. Stepping outside, the warm summer air wrapped around me, but it did little to calm the chaos in my chest. My hands trembled, my breath came in uneven bursts, and my mind replayed the moment over and over again. Kicked out of my sister's wedding. By my own fiancé. Over something so trivial, yet it felt like everything. Aimlessly, I wandered toward the small garden beside the venue, away from the crowd, away from the whispers. The weight of the moment pressed down on me. This wasn't just an overreaction. This was something deeper. Something I had refused to see before now. My phone buzzed with messages, each one tugging at my attention. My sister had sent several, her words frantic, apologetic, and confused. She didn't understand what had just happened any more than I did. And yet, a sinking feeling in my stomach told me that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't as sudden as it seemed. Moments later, the doors to the venue opened again, and Olivia emerged, still in her wedding gown. Her hurried steps, the way she lifted the layers of lace and tulle, to keep from tripping, spoke of urgency. Her eyes searched mine, full of concern, frustration, and something else, something she wasn't sure how to say. She stood beside me, catching her breath, and in that moment, the sounds of the wedding faded into the background. The clinking of glasses, the hum of laughter, the muffled music, it all felt distant, like it belonged to another world. A world I had just been pushed out of. She struggled to find the right words, shifting on her feet as if grounding herself for what she needed to say. The weight of unspoken thoughts lingered between us, heavy and undeniable. Eventually, she admitted what had been stirring in the back of my own mind. This wasn't about the juice. It had never been about the juice. The realization settled in, cold and absolute. Andrew had been waiting for this moment. Searching for an excuse. The stain on his shirt had simply given him the perfect opportunity. The pieces clicked together, forming a picture I hadn't wanted to see before. His impatience, his growing distance, the way his temper flared over the smallest inconveniences. It hadn't started today. Today had only been the breaking point. For the first time, I saw the situation clearly, not as a misunderstanding, not as an accident, but as the moment everything I thought I had unraveled in front of me. And the worst part? I should have seen it coming. The garden felt quieter now, distant from the celebration inside. The soft hum of music and laughter still lingered in the air, but I no longer belonged to that world. I stood there, staring at the perfectly trimmed hedges and twinkling fairy lights, while my mind unraveled everything I had ignored for too long. Andrew's reaction hadn't been spontaneous. It hadn't been an impulsive burst of anger or embarrassment. It had been calculated, deliberate. He hadn't looked at me with frustration, he had looked at me with finality. The memories surfaced quickly, one after another, filling in the gaps I had refused to acknowledge. The cold way his voice had shifted in recent months, the barely concealed irritation whenever I spoke too long, the way his hand had hesitated before reaching for mine. It wasn't that something had suddenly changed between us today. The change had been happening for a while. I had just been too blind to see it. The signs had been there, the late nights with vague excuses, the distracted replies to my messages, the way he had started making decisions without me. I had reasoned it all away, convincing myself it was just stress, just temporary, just something we would work through. But today, in front of everyone, he had made it clear. He had been waiting for an exit. And I had handed it to him. A sharp pain settled in my chest, something raw and aching. This wasn't just about embarrassment or anger. This was about the realization that the person I had trusted with my future had already let go of me long before today. He had needed a reason, an excuse, a justification. And a spilled drink had been enough. The weight of it pressed down on me, but strangely, beneath the hurt, a quiet relief stirred. If today hadn't happened, if I had continued excusing his distance, how much longer would I have spent holding on to something that wasn't real? How much more of myself would I have given to someone who had already walked away? The truth was painful, but it was undeniable. I hadn't lost him today. I had simply seen, for the first time, that I had already been alone. The weight of the realization settled over me, heavy but clarifying. The truth was undeniable now. Andrew hadn't acted out of frustration or embarrassment. He had been looking for a way out, and I had unknowingly handed it to him. I took a slow breath, my surroundings finally coming back into focus. The gentle rustling of the trees, the distant hum of conversation from inside the venue, the glow of lights illuminating the pathway back to the entrance. My sister's wedding was still happening, untouched by the unraveling of my own world. I felt a presence beside me again, Olivia, still standing there, her gown pooling at her feet. She hadn't gone back inside. She wasn't letting this moment pass unnoticed. And that meant something. My phone buzzed in my hand, another stream of messages lighting up the screen. Some from family members, hesitant and confused. Some from mutual friends, asking if what they had just witnessed was real. But there was nothing from Andrew. No explanation. No attempt to find me. No damage control. He wasn't trying to fix this. Because for him, it wasn't broken. It was finished. A strange kind of numbness settled in. The part of me that wanted to fight, to demand an answer, to hold on to the relationship we had built, began to fade. There was nothing left to salvage. The choice had already been made, long before today. The weight in my chest didn't disappear, but there was an odd sense of lightness underneath it. Like I had been carrying something too heavy for too long, and I was finally starting to set it down. A few weeks ago, I would have begged for reassurance. I would have apologized even if I wasn't at fault. I would have asked how to fix what was broken. But standing here now, looking at the quiet sky above me, I realized I didn't need to. There was no fixing something that had already ended. There was only moving forward. The weight in my chest remained, but the urgency to fix things had vanished. There was nothing left to fight for, at least, not with Andrew. The silence from him spoke louder than any words could. He wasn't going to come after me, wasn't going to explain himself, wasn't even going to pretend to care. That truth settled deeper with each passing second. Inside, the wedding carried on, untouched by the quiet devastation unfolding just outside. I could still hear the muffled sounds of celebration, the clinking of glasses, the occasional burst of laughter, the distant melody of the band playing their next song. The world was moving forward without me, and maybe that was for the best. Olivia lingered at my side, hesitant, torn between staying with me and returning to the event she had spent months planning. This was her day, and I wouldn't take that from her. I mustered a small smile, a silent reassurance that she didn't need to sacrifice her happiness for my pain. My phone buzzed again, but I didn't bother looking at it. No message from Andrew. No explanation. No attempt at damage control. Just a handful of half-hearted texts from acquaintances, as if my sudden disappearance was nothing more than an interesting piece of gossip. It was clear now. This was never going to be the dramatic, emotional breakup I had imagined relationships ending with. There would be no tearful confrontation, no desperate attempt to salvage what was left. Andrew had already closed the door. And I wasn't going to stand outside knocking. Without another word, I turned toward the parking lot, my steps slow but certain. The weight of the moment pressed against my shoulders, but something else flickered underneath it, an unfamiliar sense of control. For the first time in months, I wasn't waiting for Andrew to decide what happened next. I was the one walking away. The walk to my car felt longer than it should have, each step heavy with the weight of everything that had just happened. The cool evening air wrapped around me, but it did little to soothe the tightness in my chest. The sounds of the wedding faded with every step, the music growing softer, the voices blurring into the background until they became nothing but distant echoes. By the time I reached my car, my hands were still shaking. Not from anger, not from sadness, just from the sheer enormity of what I had just realized. I wasn't leaving a wedding. I was leaving a relationship, a future, an entire life I had spent years believing in. I slipped into the driver's seat and closed the door behind me, shutting out the world. The silence inside the car was deafening, pressing in on me from all sides. My phone was still buzzing, but I ignored it. I wasn't ready to face the questions, the sympathy, the inevitable conversations that would follow. My fingers hovered over the ignition. For a brief moment, I considered staying. Turning back. Confronting Andrew. Demanding an answer. But then I thought of the way he had looked at me, not with frustration, not with regret, but with indifference. That had hurt more than anything. Not the words, not the public humiliation, but the realization that he had been ready to let me go long before I had even thought to hold on. With a deep breath, I started the car. The engine hummed to life, a quiet sound in the stillness of the night. I pulled out of the parking lot slowly, my headlights illuminating the path ahead. There was a road in front of me, stretching far beyond this moment, beyond this night. And for the first time in a long time, I had no idea where it was leading. I drove aimlessly at first, letting the rhythm of the road steady my thoughts. Streetlights blurred past in a haze, their glow casting long shadows against the pavement. The familiar streets of my town felt different now, as if I were seeing them for the first time. Every turn felt like a step away from the life I had planned, a step towards something unknown. It wasn't until I reached the quiet outskirts of the city that I finally pulled over. The small parking lot of an all-night diner came into view, its neon sign buzzing faintly against the dark sky. I hadn't planned to stop, hadn't even been thinking about where I was going, but something about the warm glow of the place called to me. I stepped inside, the scent of coffee and fried food wrapping around me like a familiar embrace. The diner was nearly empty, save for an older man sitting at the counter and a waitress who looked like she had been there for hours. I slid into a booth by the window, staring out at the empty parking lot as I tried to make sense of the evening. Minutes passed. Maybe longer. I wasn't sure. The waitress eventually made her way over, her notepad in hand. She asked if I wanted anything, and I ordered a coffee without thinking. Something to hold, something to ground me. She nodded and left me alone, sensing that I wasn't in the mood for small talk. I wrapped my hands around the warm ceramic mug when she returned, staring into the dark liquid as if it held the answers I didn't have. What now? That was the real question, wasn't it? What happened next? Did I go home and pretend I hadn't just watched my relationship fall apart in front of an entire wedding party? Did I call Andrew and demand a conversation he had already decided wasn't worth having? Did I let myself grieve for a future that no longer existed? Or did I accept that, maybe, this was the best thing that could have happened to me? The thought was terrifying. But also, strangely, liberating. I had spent so long trying to be the perfect fiancé, the perfect partner, always making excuses, always finding reasons to believe that things would get better. But now, sitting alone in this tiny diner with nothing but my own thoughts, I finally had to admit the truth. I hadn't been happy in a long time. Maybe this was my chance to figure out who I was without Andrew. Without the expectations, the plans, the future that had never really belonged to me in the first place. The realization settled over me, not as a sudden epiphany, but as a quiet understanding. A small, steady voice in the back of my mind telling me that this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The coffee in my hands had long since cooled, but I still held on to the mug, absently tracing my fingers along the rim. The diner remained quiet, save for the soft hum of a radio playing in the background. A few more people had trickled in, a couple sitting near the back, a man nursing a plate of fries at the counter, but no one paid any attention to me. And for the first time that night, I was grateful for the anonymity. The weight of the evening pressed down on me, but it no longer felt as suffocating. Sitting here, away from the chaos of the wedding, away from Andrew, I finally had the space to think clearly. I had spent years building a life with him, weaving my plans into his, compromising my dreams to fit the shape of ours. And yet, he had unraveled it all in a single moment, as if it had never really mattered. As if I had never really mattered. The truth was painful, but now, in the quiet solitude of this diner, I could no longer avoid it. This wasn't about a stained shirt. This wasn't about a wedding. Andrew had been done with me long before tonight. I replayed the past year in my mind, sifting through the moments that I had brushed aside, the subtle changes I had ignored. The way his texts had grown shorter, his affection more fleeting. The way he had started making plans without me, dismissing my concerns as if they were inconsequential. The way I had shrunk myself down, making excuses, convincing myself that this was just a phase, that love was supposed to feel like effort, that I just needed to try harder. But love wasn't supposed to feel like trying to hold on to someone who had already let go. A strange mix of emotions stirred within me, grief, anger, relief. They didn't come all at once, but in slow, steady waves, each one washing away a little more of the illusion I had clung to for so long. I wasn't just mourning the relationship. I was mourning the version of myself that had believed in it. The version of myself that had thought love meant sacrificing parts of who I was to keep someone else happy. The version of myself that had settled for the bare minimum, convinced that if I just gave enough, he would finally see me the way I had always seen him. But he never had. And he never would. The realization wasn't just painful. It was freeing. For the first time, I wasn't wondering what I could do to fix things. I wasn't questioning whether I had been enough. I wasn't waiting for Andrew to give me closure. He had already given it to me. The moment he had looked at me with nothing but indifference, the moment he had let me walk away without a fight, that had been my answer. And now, I had to decide what came next. I set the coffee mug down, my fingers no longer trembling. The weight in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it no longer felt unbearable. Instead, it felt like something I could carry. I glanced at my phone again, scrolling past the unanswered messages. Olivia had sent another text, telling me she would call as soon as the wedding settled down. My mother had left a voicemail, her voice tight with concern. And Andrew? Nothing. I exhaled, finally accepting what that meant. I wasn't losing him. I was gaining myself back. And maybe, just maybe, that was the real gift hidden in all of this. I slid out of the booth, leaving a few bills on the table before making my way toward the door. The night air was cool against my skin as I stepped outside, the quiet hum of the city stretching out before me. For the first time in a long time, I had no idea what the future held. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't scare me. The night air felt different now, lighter, less suffocating. I stood in the empty parking lot for a moment, staring up at the dark sky, feeling the weight of the evening settle into something quieter. The ache was still there, the remnants of heartbreak lingering beneath my ribs, but it no longer felt unbearable. I wasn't walking away from something that could have been saved. I was walking away from something that had been broken long before I had noticed the cracks. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone, my thumb hovering over Olivia's name. She had texted again, asking if I was okay, telling me she would come find me if I needed her. The thought of her, still in her wedding dress, worrying about me instead of enjoying her night, made my heart clench. I typed out a quick message, letting her know I was fine, that I'd call her tomorrow. Then, without thinking twice, I did something I hadn't done in a long time. I turned off my phone. No more waiting for an explanation that would never come. No more staring at a screen, hoping for words that wouldn't change anything. No more holding on to a relationship that had let go of me long before I had let go of it. The road stretched ahead, open and uncertain. I didn't know exactly where I was going, but for the first time in a long time, that was okay. This wasn't the ending I had expected. But maybe it was the one I needed. And with that thought, I got into my car, took one last look at the past I was leaving behind, and drove toward whatever came next.